I always held the belief that the problem with modern women isn't their innate female nature, but more often societal leniency and lack of responsibility as opposed to men. This is where I generally deviate from the ideologies of one of the main premises of the Red Pill Society, which I believe is a source of many errors and gaps they have in their arguments or way of thinking, without which the ideologies would be flawless. My theory can be summarized by the quote: it's not female nature, it's human nature. That is not to say that there isn't any aspect of human nature that spices up the toxic behavior many women have today. It just means that the female aspect has very little to do with it, as opposed to societal and situational triggers of the times we live in today. To effectively explain my perspective, I came up with an hypothesis I like to call the female and exam hypothesis, which has to do with the leverage the fear of failure has on women, which ensures they take responsibility, like men do, to prevent loss of investments under certain conditions. But before we dive into that, we would have to start from somewhere, and that would be what constitutes present state of female nature as we see it today. Modern female nature, for the most part, is human nature that has acclimatized to efficiencies from previous times and still tries to hold on to benefits such times provided without taking into consideration its responsibilities. More like a societal sleight of hand, similar to taking advantage of loopholes in common law to legally get away with something that should, with all intents and purposes, be illegal. Now, what do I mean by all this technical jargon? Back in the day, when the world was much less advanced and way tougher and hostile to everyone, people sorted themselves into a more efficient societal structure. At least for the time, with defined roles. Men were expected to build, lead, protect, and provide because they were overall stronger and way more capable of hard labor. Women were expected to cook, clean, reproduce, and take care of the house. This was efficient for the time, and it is considered now the traditional way things were done. However, in a society that has become hyper improved by men, whereby many resources are mostly restorable, and automation has made hyperproduction more efficient and scalable, as well as reducing the need for manpower, or at least redirecting it to more specialized fields that automation cannot subsidize, the planet all of a sudden became exponentially more bearable. This led to what I would refer to as safe jobs and fields of work that relies more on intellect, which men and women don't differ significantly in. Now, these fields of work expectedly created a false sense of equivalency between men and women that led to the assumption that men and women are capable of building civilization to the same extent. This obviously isn't true, though it's treated like it is. And so, many women and men indirectly believe that because men and women excel in aspects of raw brain power and problem solving needed in fields like engineering or theoretical physics or even medicine and law, that it puts men and women on the same scale as equals when it comes to building civilization from scratch. This, of course, doesn't take into consideration the actual building part or the serious hard labor involved, and therefore there are endeavors to summarize these jobs and equate them to regular work, like safe jobs, and even worse, since the jobs are dirty, in quote, it calls it out as low-value jobs, though it's the main force needed to bring theory into the real world. Now, safe jobs aren't easy in the slightest. They are not. But they are much safer and easier than digging for black gold only to have the mine collapse on you. Bringing this back to topic, the false assumptions by many men and women, as well as other factors we will discuss later, has helped shape the general perspective of society that men and women sacrifice the same for society. In fact, that is one of the assumptions that led to the wrong saying that what men can do, women can do better. The side effects, of course, showed itself when women got the same rights as men as they should have a long time ago. But as good as that sounds, there are always consequences with rights, and that's one thing that many women, if not almost all women, were not prepared for. Because women didn't give the same effort to achieve goals that the men gave, nor worked under the same strenuous circumstances that men worked in, they don't see the world as men do. Not seeing the world the same way men see the world allows women to act in specific ways that would not warranty somebody that sees the world in that way to act. And the problem is men also indulge them when they do so. Look at it this way. Imagine you get freedom to leave your parents' house, who provided everything for you, and you lacked nothing when living with them, but in return, you had to do some chores. The day you finally leave your parents' house, you would feel ecstatic because you finally escaped house chores, which you may have hated because you felt you weren't getting paid for them. But now that you are free, all these responsibilities all of a sudden fall on your shoulders. You have to get a house for yourself but have no money. You finally get a job doing stuff you don't want to do and end up renting a house, and oh, wait, you still have to keep the house clean, meaning you still end up doing house chores after all. So yes, you do have freedom to go where you want to or do what you want to do, but you have all this responsibility that imprisons you and takes your time and effort. Now you would understand how your parents felt when taking all these responsibilities. But that may not also be true. You instead may feel resentful at your parents, especially if you were spoiled as a child and complained at little chores that they asked you to do. If spoiled, your resentment towards them would most likely be that they abandoned you to such a world that made you have to fend for yourself, not realizing you asked for that freedom. Since it's evidence that spoiled individuals never take accountability for their choices or actions, they see the situation as their parents abandoning them, and so begin to develop the mentality that they need to either find a new sponsor like their parents or use whatever means necessary to extract resources from their parents for their perceived injustice towards them. In this little example, both the child and the parents are at fault. If the parents didn't spoil their child, the child would not be acting that way. Also, it's the child's fault. Just because your parents spoiled you doesn't mean you should allow that to get to your head. A tyrant is still a tyrant, regardless of whether or not they had enablers. This is the similar case to how men and women operate in society today. Today and in the past, many men, but not all, have been known to spoil their women, giving them gifts, spoiling them with chivalry, making sure they never have to work by providing servants, and always making them feel they were the most beautiful women on earth. Women were literally shielded from reality and the terror of the real world. This wasn't always the case, but it happened enough times. Now that women fought for freedom from living under a man for both good and bad reasons, women still want the wining and dining privileges men had provided them for many years. This is because they have been acclimatized to it for a very, very long time. and the fact they crash landed into reality of freedom and its responsibilities. They are resentful that they have to live through a fraction of what men have lived through all these years. And now desire men that still make more money than they do to act as sponsors or security, or entrap their previous male partners in ways that allows them to keep providing for them despite they not doing it for him or any other man. Also, the fact they feel that their education or safe jobs is equivalent to men's hard labor, education, and safe jobs, as described earlier, this makes them believe that they have given the same for society and therefore deserve every position men have, the illusion that keeps on giving. Now, this sounds a lot like what we would attribute to female nature. So why did I insist it's human nature and not just female nature? Well, if you noticed, I used the term spoiled child in my example and not spoiled girl, to make sure to frame it from the perspective of either male or female and not just female. This is important because men and women would act very much in the same way if the circumstances were switched. If society were organized in the manner that men were expected to cook and clean and women were expected to give their life for the protection and the building of society, for the safety of their men and offspring, men would most likely be acting like women and vice versa today. This, of course, would have some exceptions like biological differences such as levels of emotions and response to magnitude, but they would pretty much be the same. How do I know this? Well, this is where we get into the female and exam hypothesis I came up with earlier. Women are all rational when there is something to lose. When a woman or girl pays tuition fees to learn a specific course she needs to get a job, she tends to optimize responsibilities in order not to waste money, time, or effort. Because she has something to lose, she studies hard, burns the midnight oil, and even arrives with all the equipment to make sure she makes the exam in one sitting. Reasons being that if she doesn't take all precautions or acts responsible, she would lose all the invested money, time, and effort to failure. If she woke up late and missed the exams for the course, the person she would blame at the time would be herself. The same can be said for women preparing for an interview to get a job. She, like men, would do everything possible to make sure she passes the interview. All of a sudden, in such cases, women are aware of and take responsibility for their actions. This means that if men were to carry themselves as employers or lecturers, not only would women contribute their best to the relationships, but would also take responsibilities like men when things go wrong on their part. That means women would literally think like men when it comes to mutualism and responsibility, which would be a definite good impact on society. That is something that men should look into, and men should think of, and men should develop a strategy to help women accomplish, as well as to use as a leverage in these times. So until next time, I am Polyboy, and I will see you next time. Bye.